Communication Management and is the Communications Consultant for Afire. Joe is going to share with us today some great practical tips and solutions to help us all on that measurement journey, which is certainly a big challenge for us in internal communication. So we really hope today that you'll pick up some more practical tips and something that's really easy to implement in the office to help you get towards proving the value of your communication efforts. Before we start, just a couple of words from me, just to say that if you have questions, please do pop them in the chat box that you should see on screen, and I'll come back at the end to help ask Joe those questions and see if we can get those answers. Also as well, just to let you know that the recording today the webinar today is being recorded, and we will also share the slides afterwards, so don't worry too much around making notes. And a final note as well, we are also working with the lovely Joe towards developing a toolkit at the end of the year, so hopefully we'll have lots more practical and easy advice with measurement coming your way. So at this point, I just would like to hand over to Joe, who's going to talk us through our webinar today. Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks everybody for joining. So I'm just getting used to these slides. So thanks, Jen, for the intro. I'm going to bring to you today a 7-step process to help you really get to grips with measurement. And this is drawn on lots of my own experience. I'm now an independent communication consultant, but I've got loads of experience in academic research, global project management, leadership, internal comms. So I come with a very varied, diverse background, which I think really helps from a measurement perspective. Measurement is one of those things that I actually really love. I'm a bit geeky about it, and I know many people aren't in the comms profession, but I've brought this to you in a hopefully a simpler, practical way, as Jen mentioned, so that you can at least get started. So the outline of the webinar today is going to take you through how you start your journey on measurement to help you understand what good measurements look like. As I said, I want this to be something that's easily understood and effective approaches that you can apply. And they're all drawn from my experience. So I've tried and tested them. Obviously, the things that didn't work, I haven't put in the webinar. And I want you to be able to have simple ways to also analyze and understand your data. You know, there's one thing gathering the data, but there's also a huge component to actually analyzing that. And then hopefully that'll lead to greater influence and credibility as you go through this whole process. So as IoIC members and comms professionals, you'll know that being skillful and competent in measuring the effectiveness of your communication is actually a core competency on the internal comms profession map developed by the IoIC. Yet we know that this is actually still a significant area where you feel that you need support. So hence why we're obviously bringing you the webinar today, which is great. Now, the 7-step approach, as I mentioned, that I'm about to share will practically guide you and hopefully enable you to take a step forwards to become more confident and also competent as a communication measurement practitioner. So hopefully in less than an hour's time, you'll have absolutely no excuses to measuring your internal comms effectively. And I hope you'll take with you a good dose of confidence and ideas as well. So, step 1. So I'm assuming that you know, a big assumption, but I'm hoping it's a good assumption, you know what a good communication plan contains, right? Great plans always define what their purpose is, what they're wanting to achieve, and then list the supportive tactics. It's actually the same for measuring the effectiveness of internal communication. So you're tasked with communicating a new campaign, for example, deploying a new platform or supporting a new chief executive. Whatever it is that you're striving for, what does success look like once you've completed your task? What outcome do you actually want, or what do you need? So we start any measurement planning with the end in mind, and these are called our desired outcomes. And step 1 in our journey is to define those desired outcomes. Now, just to clarify, an outcome is the effect or the difference that you're wanting from your communication. It can be simply defined as what you want your target audience to know, feel, or do as a consequence of your comms efforts. Outcomes will give you the direction that you need and keep you focused. When you get caught up in the mountain of data and tactics and, humdrum of life, outcomes will give you the right perspective too. They're the light at the end of your campaign tunnel, as I like to put it. And because any internal communication effort should be aligned to support your business, you can help yourself define the desired outcomes you're striving for by going to any of these sources. Now, we know that, as I've just been talking about outcomes, it might seem a little overwhelming. You might not understand how you can draw, where you can draw the answers from to get to your desired outcomes. But these 5 points on the screen will hopefully give you some ideas. You could start with, always a good place to start, by reading and understanding your organisational strategy and your goals. The good business strategies will define the future state and future desired behaviours, the long-term goal or the destination the company aspires to achieve. They'll likely give you some context for the environment and also the current state within which you're working, which is always helpful for you to consider as you then position your communication campaign or communication effort into that business environment. And then, armed with sound knowledge of the business direction, you'll be more confident and better informed, in essence, to talk in the right language to your senior leaders. And this is also an area where, as internal comms practitioners, we really need to up our game. So you're arming yourself with the right knowledge and also the right language, as I say. Now, even without a clear business strategy available, which sadly is commonplace in the business world, I hate to say this, but I've been in many a situation where there hasn't actually been a clear business strategy, and I'm sure some people on the webinar will be nodding in agreement. But in the absence of that, you can still take the opportunity to ask your leaders what impact they're expecting from this campaign effort that you're leading. So what's their vision for the future of the business? How will this campaign help them achieve the desired business outcomes? What are they looking to change? Ask them that. And what challenges are they trying to overcome? All these questions are really, really good ones to ask your leaders, because you're picking their brains and their expertise from a leadership and business perspective to, again, position your communication campaign effectively within that environment. Alternatively, you can seek useful direction from reviewing your own comms strategy, actually. Now, comms strategies will have had some foundational research and current state analysis completed, presumably, to identify the gaps and the future landscape that can give you a steer on appropriate outcomes for your specific efforts in this case. Another thing that you can do is engage some colleagues or on your project or within your comms team. Get your heads together, have a conversation and define what you're aiming to change from a knowledge, behaviour or attitude perspective as a consequence of working together on this campaign or this communication effort. And I think it's also really, really good to get the employee perspective. Let's not forget that they're the most affected by our communications. They're our employees and our line managers. Now, I'd strongly advocate at this stage that you seek their input on what the desired outcomes might actually look like from their perspective. Now, I will come back to audiences later on in the webinar, but as you set out on your measurement journey, arming yourself with end user insights will really, really, most definitely help you steer towards a successful outcome. I can't advocate that piece enough. And I think sometimes we do actually forget those end users. We think of it from a, corporate perspective, a leadership perspective, the project strategy or, perspective, but let's please think about our employees as well. So I said this is going to be full of practical examples, and here's one. So to give you an example, this is what outcomes you might be striving for in an HR employee benefit campaign. So it's totally made up, but with a bit of experience behind it. Having done your research, you understand what the ultimate business impact you're striving for in the longer term. And they could be things like increased levels of employee well-being, maybe, employee loyalty, increased levels of staff retention, and maybe, staff referrals of new talent. Now, your HR employee benefits campaign can help achieve the desired business impact. It has the opportunity to enhance the right culture, the right behaviours, and also the employment conditions, actually. So with that knowledge in mind, the outcomes of your employee benefits campaign effort could therefore be, as you can see on the screen, that your employees know what benefits they're entitled to. They know where to sign up for the benefits that they want to select. They feel valued in that whole process and the fact that you're giving them some great benefits. They feel fairly remunerated by their benefits package. They select their chosen benefits by the closing deadline, and they recommend the company is a great place to work. So you can see by this example on the screen how we've gone through the know, feel, do model. It's really, really simple, yet it's effective. I've tried it loads of times, it always works. And it's a really effective framework to help you easily define those outcomes that you're striving for. So we're taking the desired outcomes, and once you have them and also the business impact clearly defined, this gives you the guiding compass that then you need to define the right measures. So these really are like the bumper guide rails, I would say, at the bowling alley. So get them set up, and your measurement approach stands a much higher chance of knocking down those skillful. You know, it's a really lovely and robust framework, and it's really easy to remember as well. And having your outcomes makes defining your communication tactics easier, which will be the next step. It also makes them more focused as well. And when you know what comms tactics you're needing to deploy, then the measurements and the metrics almost fall into your lap. So it's almost like a funnel effect. You know, you're defining your desired outcomes, then you're thinking about the appropriate outputs for comms tactics, and then if you know what you're actually focusing on, then actually the measurements fall into place. So I'll walk you through the example of the HR campaign promoting new employee benefits, and you'll see how by starting with clear outcomes leads to your tactics and your measures. So to achieve your desired outcomes, you might deploy a series of emails, for example, a promotional video, flyers, posters maybe around the site, and then a benefits roadshow, for example. You'll also need a website or a portal for employees to actually visit online to explore the benefits that they're entitled to and then make their selections. And with those outcomes and tactics defined, you can then map out the associated measures. So you can see on the example on the screen that we've got here that you'll be more focused in pinpointing the right measures if you take this approach. You'll more easily be able to identify and draw from sources of data that will monitor your campaign's impact. It'll also help you monitor your progress and hopefully success. You know, that's what we're striving for. And with continual monitoring of some key data points, the ones that you've defined, if any of your indicators don't show a positive trend, you can then deploy additional or alternative comms tactics in good time, hopefully. So the outcomes, outputs, measurement approach that I've just explained works for any scale of comms effort. That's the beauty of it. It's really good. So be it a business as usual event or newsletter, or actually a wide scale organisational change, this process actually works wherever. Obviously, it will take much more time to go through it and define it if you're working on an organisational change effort to define your outcomes. But nevertheless, the approach applies to anything. Now, as IC practitioners, I know full well that our time is stretched and it's really precious. Now, with effective and focused measurement, you should begin to know if your efforts and time spent are actually worthwhile. That's the other beauty of measuring the effectiveness of your communications. And of course, if it's not, then you'll have valid data and insights to stop work on, or at least challenge, I would say, low value tasks. And I've been through this myself. We were running a newsletter campaign on a monthly basis, and actually our readership rates compared to everything else that we were doing was really low. We did some further exploration in addition to getting the data from the analytics tool that we were using, and actually sought advice from an input from the wider organisation, and it just wasn't hitting the spot. And actually, the key issue was that we hadn't defined our outcomes clearly up front. So I culled it. I completely stopped the focus on the newsletter. We stopped doing it. We did other efforts, and actually it was never missed. So it took us, which freed up a load of resources. And with the data to prove that actually well, hardly any of our workforce was reading it, and then with anecdotal feedback gathered from employees to say why it wasn't being read, then actually we had the data we needed and the justification we needed to stop doing it. So it was actually a relief for the comms team because they felt disheartened, when they weren't seeing that we weren't having a high readership rate. But it was also empowering to us to think actually we're not adding value to the business. We're wasting our time in essence, and we can focus our efforts and energy in areas where it's going to have greater business impact. So that's exactly what we did. So as I say, this is if you do put the right measures in place, and you actually challenge what you're working on because of the data that you're getting through, this is empowering, and it's also rewarding as well. It allows you to further enhance your business value, your credibility, and actually, if you're going to stop doing something that isn't adding value, then it can even help your sanity as well. Joking aside. So another way to keep your measurement efforts focused, effective and simple is to map out your audiences. Now this is step 3. So all impactful comms are targeted and consider the audience for which they are intended. We know that. Now effective measurement is actually exactly the same. Now the first step is to list, or as we might call it, segment your audiences. Now the example that I have on the screen continues with the HR benefits campaign. Now I've split the audiences quite simply, but if it's a global campaign, for example, or there are regional benefit differences, you might also split the audience group by a specific location. So there's no rule to this as to how you segment your audiences. You do it that's appropriate for your business and for your campaign or what you're working on. But in essence, it's a really helpful tool, because you've got each audience group where you think that they currently sit on the chart. Now you can either do that based on your knowledge of where they are, or you can go and actually seek some input and go and chat to some line managers or new starters and actually get a sense from their feedback as to, are they blockers, are they champions, might they be detractors, or might they be supporters. It doesn't really matter which camp they lie in. What's key is that you'll be wanting to move them to a different place, hopefully up the chart, up the positive attitude, to either become champions or supporters. And then what you do is map them where you need them to be in the future. So if we take the line managers example, the green dot shows you where the team assessed them to be, that's current state, and the arrowhead to the right shows them where you need them to be. So you need them to be bigger champions. And we know that line managers are hugely powerful and influential because every employee has one. So, that's a key area to look at. Now, this example is simplified for the purposes of the webinar, but the benefit of audience mapping is that you can visually see where you might have obvious resistance and challenges. That's really helpful anyway. And in this example, it's the office staff. Where you can gain some quick wins, and in this example again, it's your group of starters because they've got a smaller gap to get to where you need them to be. Or where you should target your communication and measurement efforts for greatest impact. So, for example, assuming the field staff are less likely to come into the headquarters site to attend benefits, roadshows and events and stuff like that, you might wish to focus your communication efforts and measurements on online channels for this group. So taking more of an interest in their email open rates and levels of email engagement for this audience as an indicator of their awareness and interest, because they'll be less likely to gain awareness through other channels, potentially. Now, of course, audience mapping can be subjective, I know that, and it is open to interpretation. But the exercise is intended for you to do as a comms team, in essence. It's not for share with the public, because it could really upset some people. Don't do that. It enables you to gain a clear view of your collective audiences and where you want them to be in the future. And I know that this works because every time that I've done this, I found it beneficial because it generates lots of useful team discussions, which are valuable in their own right. It actually allows us to see the critical areas that our comms efforts, and importantly, the monitoring of our metrics should be focused for maximum impact. So it's a cool tool. So, talking about the whole practice of measuring comms, I know that we can quickly feel like it's completely overwhelming, to be honest. And this is a significant reason why actually many of us delay or don't even start measuring the value of our efforts. It just seems, I don't know where to start. Now, I did say I was going to give you some practical advice. So I'm suggesting that you don't boil the ocean. You've all heard that phrase. I think it's really important and appropriate in the context of measurement. I don't want you to expect to go from zero to measurement hero overnight, but please do take responsibility and take a simple step forward. So on this slide, what you'll see are 3 easy, small ways that you can begin to measure the effectiveness of your internal communications. There'll be plenty of others, but these are just examples. So first one, measure one event. Keep it simple. Say start with a small town hall or something, and apply all the principles that I've just spoken about, but keep your measurement efforts focused on that one event. Perhaps monitor email open rates rather, and the time spent engaged with that content to give you an indication of awareness and interest level in the event before it happened. And then perhaps follow up after the event with a short online survey to measure against your desired outcomes. You could even poll people as they exit the room, grab a sample of people as they leave. Now, this simple approach gives you a manageable opportunity. It's also not that high profile. It's quite, subtle and behind the scenes, and gives you a chance to easily debrief as a team then and to reflect, to improve your measurement approach next time. You'll learn something from the whole process. The other alternative is that you could start your measurement focus on one channel. And actually, this is where I started with measuring comms. And I started with leadership emails. We know that they go out. We know that they're highly important. And the content in them should be really powerful and engaging. Now, this is where I started using email tracking software. You'll have heard of things like Popular, Banana Tag, and Contact Monkey as examples. There are plenty out there. But with the analytics, I could see the levels of interest in those leadership emails. Also, the type of content, I could see what people were drawn to in terms of content. And I could see that segmented by audience, by departments, by roles and locations. Now, some of these tools are more clever than others and provide you with more analytics depending on how much you spend, in essence. And I know we don't always have the budget to use one of these kind of fancy tools, but what I'm saying is that in that process, our own curiosity level spiked. So as we were able to get the data coming in and have a look and see who was really engaged and what content and which leader, funnily enough, became a little bit of a competition. But it was really, really insightful. And we just became really curious as to, what was going on in the wider sort of organisation. And we began to get our heads around the data and ask ourselves, so what does this actually mean? What does this actually tell me? They were the kind of questions we were then asking ourselves. The beauty of this was that nobody else had access to the analytics, so we really had a safe space to learn and to challenge and question ourselves before we then began reporting out on the data and our recommendations to our leaders. So we were monitoring for 3 or 4 months the data coming in to truly analyze, to understand it and look at trends as well. So we became a little bit geek-like as we were looking at it. The third idea is that you could focus your measurement on just one targeted audience group. So you might be in the midst of a larger communication campaign, but you want to take a manageable, less overwhelming step towards measurement to focus on a small group, a subpopulation of your entire audience. Tell them what you're piloting and involve them. Ask them for their help to critique your survey questions, for example, or even help them to analyse your data. Anything that leads to more robust measurement in the future is going to be hugely beneficial to you. And what I'm also saying in that is the fact that you don't have to do comms by yourself. There will be naturally some analytical people out there in your audience and in your employee base. So tap into those talents, I suppose. Okay, so now you're running along with your HR employee benefits campaign. We're going back to that, and roadshows and emails and the benefits portal are all being delivered. You've got some measures, metrics, data flowing in. And in essence, it's crunch time now because you need to understand what the data actually means. The step 5 is all about getting under the skin of your data and understanding it. So if we go back, remember those outcomes that you defined up front. It's worth reminding yourself at this point and at key time points of what they are, because they're your bowling alley bumpers, remember? And if you look at the data of this framework and ask, so what does the data tell me? It can help you see whether you're progressing towards your outcomes. You can also think about and consider the context behind the data. So roadshow attendance, for example, is it going as expected? What's the norm for the event attendance? What else has been going on recently? Is it holiday season? So consideration of the wider context and also the influences at play will help you define whether your data is showing a positive, a neutral, or a negative trend. Also, what's another way of looking at your data? Again, other people's perspectives, as I've alluded to, can be really helpful to consider their insights and, importantly, how your data might be challenged by those you report it to later on. So forewarned is forearmed. So again, seeking people's views on what the data is telling them, might be slightly different to you, but getting all these different perspectives is hugely helpful. But this also leads on to bias, and we all have it. But is yours and your team's bias getting in the way of objectively understanding the data? I think that's a really good question. Is there a business unit that that's rather awkward and challenging to deal with? Like we all know some. We know plenty probably, but are you negatively biased towards the data coming in from that group? You might be. The bias is something that's really important. It's extremely important, actually, to acknowledge whenever you're analysing and interpreting data. So make sure, please, that you do test your assumptions as you're going through that analysis process. Now, while you'll have gathered data, other groups gather data too. So befriending the likes of HR and IT and gaining access to their data can help you validate your thinking or even make your insights and recommendations even more credible. So it's worthwhile seeing what data they collect and will be willing to share. Plus, it works both ways, right? Your data might well be valuable or insightful to them as well, so it could be a win-win situation. And finally, don't please look at data sets in isolation. There's always a bigger picture going on, and it's really useful to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. What other data have you gathered? What's the scenario at play within the organisation? What's going on? And what's that holistic view, therefore, then telling you? Don't go down a rabbit warren, is what I'm saying. Oh, come on, slides. Okay, so the next step in the process of measurement is reporting. So before you begin to pull together your report, I ask you to go back to your outcomes. These are massively important when it comes to measurement. I can't, reinforce that point enough. So what were you wanting your employees to know, feel, and do as a consequence of your communication? And having gained insights from the wider business, what was the business impact your campaign was going to achieve or support? With this framework, that's the content of your report, in essence, scoped out. You're aiming now to show that what you set out to achieve has either been done, is progressing well, or equally important, hasn't made a difference yet. Now, I'm hoping that if you have a longer running campaign, you wouldn't have got the latter outcome, because your data monitoring would have indicated that you needed to implement contingent or alternate actions, comms actions, to achieve your desired outcomes. But knowing that no change has been made in the business is sometimes even more important than celebrating complete success. Sometimes we go into these campaigns and we don't know if they've made a difference. But actually your data can tell you one way or the other, or neutral, as to the impact of the efforts that you've been going to. So as we look around the no-feel-do model, there's a number of different ideas I'm suggesting that you actually take on board when it comes to reporting. Now keep it visual. Our brains are hardwired to process and remember visuals more easily, so please make sure that your report has that visual flair. I love using Pictochart for great infographic ideas, and then replicating my own version in PowerPoint, for example. You can do the same. Tailor the content to who you're reporting it to. So you might need to create different styles and types of report, actually, depending on who you're targeting and who you're reporting it to. So a chief exec, for example, wants to know very, very different things to what your HR team wants to know, and also what your comms team might want to know. So make sure that you're armed with knowing what their needs are, and importantly, how they might challenge you in your report summary. Now, we talked about visuals, but I also advocate mixing up the visuals. Now, this will help make your message interesting and also easier to understand. So, you can use graphs to show trends, pie charts to represent audiences, icons to impact, mix up the visuals so it's not all samey and it's got a lot of interest there. It's also really important to add a human touch. Now, what I mean by this is that figures, so we're gathering data and they tend to be figure-based, but they can be really unemotional. So add quotes or survey comments to your report, anonymised, of course, unless you've got people's permission. But that will help share the sentiment, and it allows you to then build that human bond, that stronger bond with whoever you're reporting it to as well. I also advocate citing your data sources. So not only does this give you credibility and validity to the data because it looks like it's come from a decent source, you know what that source is, but it also, for you, it makes it easier for you to remember where you built your opinions and recommendations on. So if you've got somewhere to go back to, because you've cited your data source, you can refer to the document or answer a question, if you've been challenged about, your recommendations or whatever. Let it flow. I like this one. We are communicators. We love a great story. So, think of letting your report flow like a good story. So share your baseline, where you started from, the business impact, the sort of current state, and then what you're recommending, that future state, next to where the future state, so that you're actually putting it into context and it's got a nice flow to it. Now, I love colours. Colours are great, but again, please keep them to a minimum. The design principles of the power of three apply exceptionally well here. What's also really good is if you use your brand colours rather than going off on a tangent to make it all jazzy. If you do use your brand colours, then it actually keeps it looking professional. So that's got a little bit of power and influence just because you've done that. What's the other one? Oh yeah, ask yourself the so what. So, I love this. This is a great challenge question, and it's not the first time that I've mentioned it in this webinar, but it's a really good question to ask yourself. So what does your content mean? So what? What is it? If your data doesn't have any meaning, you can't work it out. Don't include it in the report. Which brings me on to my final point or recommendation is to keep it simple, stupid. Less is more. You can always talk around the visuals, you can share the story in your narrative, or you can have backup data if it's needed. But the report itself, to get that focus, to get the attention and to be influential really needs to be kept simple. Now there are 10 things on the screen. If I had to choose 3, I would pick report back on your outcomes, you have to do that one, tailor the content and keep it simple. But I'm sure you've got favourites as you look through it. So step 6 is also about the art of data reporting, and the example that I've got on the screen is actually a nice little report that showcases a newsletter campaign and the efforts in supporting a new corporate strategy. Sounds familiar, I'm sure. Clearly, the comms team here was working to increase employees' understanding of the new strategic priorities and ensure that the news reaching each employee was considered relevant. Now, what's good about it is that it applies most of the 10 tips that I shared with you on the previous slide. It's focused around its desired outcome of improving employee understanding of the strategy. It's simple, and importantly, it has context to the figures that have been cited as well. It also visually hammers home the point that less is more. It's a very simple little report, and I know that the report doesn't show a huge amount of work that goes on behind the scenes. That's not the intent. The fact is, it's showing, it's been positively received and is having an impact on the business. But for senior leaders who want their strategy heard and their employees to be given relevant and engaging content to keep them focused and productive, The comms team here, in this example, have definitely demonstrated the business value that they're adding in a clear and effective way. Come on, slides. Here we go. So continuing with data reporting, but from a different angle, step 6 is also about delivering influence. So I can tell you, and you will know this, that a slide deck or beautifully designed report of data won't influence anyone by itself. It's actually you that has to champion the work that you've put in and the difference that you've made. You have to own the data and the recommendations to go along with it. You're the one that actually has to do the influencing. Now, I'm not going to go into the best practices on presentation skills or influencing tips here. Jen, perhaps we can have a different webinar on that one, but it would be remiss of me to take you all the way through the previous critical steps and not remind you of the importance of influencing your stakeholders and senior executives. Step 6 is your moment to shine, and with your newfound and super home measurement skills and insights, this is the moment that you can influence with your expertise and with data to back you up. This is you proudly saying that I'm credible and I know what I'm talking about. So 1, this step begins way, way, way back. Remember talking to your leaders back at the beginning to find out what their vision of success was from this campaign. Remember identifying some key champions when you did the audience mapping exercise and engaging with them along the way. Remember those leaders who you involved to share their perspectives on the meaning of your data. It's all these steps that are the foundations for your insight and rapport building. Now, if you've been totally smart, 1 or 2 of those engaged champions whose counsel that you've sought will actually be sat around the boardroom table as you go into influence. Second one, as you step into the boardroom with your infographic in hand or your slide deck loaded, actually remind yourself what you want to achieve at the moment. So what do you want the C-suite to know, feel or do? I really, really love that model because it's really simple and you can apply it to yourself. So as you're going into it, think about what do you want them to know, feel or do as a consequence of your presentation. And channel that focus and behave and communicate in line with your desired outcome for that specific presentation. And then number 3, we're all really good at it, but while winging it might be an unspoken competency of all internal comms practitioners, this is not the time for it. This is your credibility and influential powers at stake, so please, please prepare and practice. So I've given you 6 steps to measuring your internal comms effectively. They've been tried, they've been tested, and I know that they work. But now step 7 is arguably the most important step, as the onus is now on you. So if this hour has been a valuable use of your time, and I hope that it has, it will result in you going back to your workplace and identifying and committing to a measurement action. Your own first step. It doesn't matter how small. I want you to know that you'll very likely make mistakes as you go along your measurement journey. I've made plenty in my time. And I see there's a question about howlers on the screen here, so I'm just smiling. But that's good, and it's absolutely okay, because from every learning comes a more knowledgeable, capable, and confident person. I couldn't have shared these measurement insights with you at the beginning of my measurement journey. I wouldn't have dared. It's been really embarrassing. But this 7-step approach is drawn from my own experience, my learnings and mistakes made over many years. And as you take your confident step forward, I want you to remain curious. Open-minded to the data tale that's being told to you. It's fascinating. Open to the feedback that you receive and curious to what it all means and where it should guide you. And open-minded to making changes as well on your approach to measurement, because boy, you're going to have to do that. And last but not least, I do have to advocate the importance of building a strategic measurement plan that aligns with and supports your communication strategy. The best internal comms practitioners and trusted advisors will be strategic in their thinking and planning. But build your measurement confidence first, because that way your whole approach to communication will have the greatest impact and greatest credibility possible. So that brings me, I think, to the end of the webinar. So that's me talking at you. But now I think it's question time.
Yes, thank you. That was brilliant. Obviously, we've spoken a lot about measurement, you and I, and I know we come from the same passionate place, and we know that we know it's challenging, but there's so much great practical tips in there, and I mirrored that confidence in measurement, but actually that strategic mindset, which will really sort of set that apart. But we're at question stage now, so we've had a couple that have come through. So the first one that we were asked early on in the webinar was around what do you do particularly for survey fatigue? How do actually getting the response rates up? How do we approach survey fatigue challenges?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and I'm sure there's more great questions to come. But survey fatigue, we know exists. So the approach that I've taken before is to actually do surveys in a different way. So there's a couple of things I would advocate here. Don't think that you have to survey the whole organisation. The other thing is, I talk about having a strategic measurement plan, and in that, if you think longer term and map out your year, and you've got some insights from other departments as to what other surveys are going on, you can actually time the surveys effectively so it doesn't feel like it's really onerous. Or you can focus on a much smaller subset, or you can just go and chat to people. You don't have to send out the online surveys. That's the beauty. You can gather data from in all sorts of ways, and having corridor conversations and making sure that you're picking a wide variety, a diverse population as you do that. That could also be a really good way, and people almost don't know that they're being surveyed in that way. You might have to declare it or just that you're using their data, but joking aside, that could work. Yeah, they would be my tips.
Thank you. That was really helpful. So I'll move on swiftly because more questions are coming in, so we'll try and get them done as quickly as get through them all. Next question was, in terms of what extent do you need to measure before and after? So thinking about the sort of think, feel, do we need to build in where we are now to understand where we need to be, and how would you approach that?
Yeah, baselines are so important from my perspective. You don't know where you're starting from otherwise. You're going backwards, you're going forwards, you're staying static. So as much as it's onerous or extra piece of work for you to do that baseline measurement, that you don't know where you're starting from otherwise. I've never, I have done it where I've not done the baseline and then just kicked myself because I didn't have a reference point. So yeah, I would always make sure you do have that baseline.
Thank you. Now I'm going to move on to the one that you noticed earlier. Can you give us any more examples of those howlers you've experienced, similar to the newsletter?
Well, I hope that there's nobody on the webinar that actually knows me. So I've had experience of so when you drill down into detail, for example, and for the example I've got here is about leadership emails. So we know that most leaders are actually quite competitive, and I think it's a funny story, but I did share with them the collective view of leadership email open rates, content engagement, etc. And of course, our leaders then wanted to know what theirs was in comparison to the others. Was their newsletter better read? Were their emails open more than the others? And it became a bit of a competition. So it can, well, it's not really that funny, but it's just being really aware of where can this. It took us down a rabbit warren in essence, and it detracted from the point that we were trying to make around the open rate and the interest and engagement levels of newsletters in their entirety. Because we had a lot going on in one of the last companies I worked for. So yeah, the leadership piece is quite interesting because they want to look for themselves. They're so competitive. I'm just trying to think of another one now. My mind's gone completely blank. I might have to come back to it. Suddenly can't think.
That's all right. We all have a desire in our minds to block out the howlers in our career, so because we've all had them. I'll move on to the next question now. Is somebody's asked, would you go through the measurement process in any detail with business leaders when you're working with them on the comms strategy? Do you find it's helpful or too much information?
It depends on the leader. Is a quick answer. Some of them love to know what you're doing and why. So if you explain the whole process, it validates what you're going through and why you're doing it, and they like that. Others just want to know the outcome. They want to know that what you've done has actually added business value. They don't want all the waffle in advance. They trust you, hopefully, to do the right thing, and they let you go. It's very dependent on the leader. So I can't really answer that for your perspective, other than getting a sense of, you know, how much detail that leader wants to glean from you. I think it's not. I think it's a nice educational because it shows that you're thoughtful in your process, thoughtful in how you're communicating, and again adds to the credibility and the validity of what you're doing. It's not just you're putting up some PowerPoint slides or, rewriting and editing somebody's blog or something. There's actually a science behind it, and there's data behind it, which is hugely valuable for you to be able to share. So yeah, it depends on the leader.
I would agree, actually. I think you talked early on in the webinar about that relationship building and sitting down with people, and I think that actually if you sort of sit down with people before you approach it to find out what their expectations are and build that relationship, it will kind of give you the instinct of how much to share and what not to share. But anyway, we're on to the next question now. So someone says you've mentioned email measurement, and they've heard of Banana Tag and Contact Monkey. Was there another name? Do you have any preference / recommendation?
So I'm not here to recommend any, because I think you've got to go through that process of deciding which one suits your organisation and your budget. And again, it's about rapport building. Do you get on with that particular company? But one I have used as well is it was formerly known as Newsweaver, but it's now known as Populo.
Wealth of things out there, and I think you're right, but I've certainly heard of those ones as well. So next question. In reference to surveying, would you always recommend sharing the CTA from C-suite for maximum engagement, or is it more about the channel and delivery? I don't know what the CTA is.
Say that question again, Jen. I don't know what CTA is.
No, I'm just reading what someone's put on the chat. I don't know if the person's still online, if they could explain what CTA is.
Call to action. So read call to action.
There you go.
We love an acronym.
So it said, would you recommend sharing the call to action from C-suite for maximum engagement, or is it more about the channel and delivery?
Oh, good question. Call to action explains the context and the why, so that's powerful in its own right as a way to engage people and explain why they're getting bombarded with these comms. So I think, yeah, I would.
I think I would as well. I think that helps to contextualize things and where you're going. That was our last question. There's no more coming through. So at this point, I just want to say thank you so much, Jo. That was so practical, so helpful. And also, we have recorded it. There's some people have problems with sound. We apologise, but hopefully you'll get the recording afterwards. And also as well, we are hopefully working with Jo as well to develop a toolkit to really break down some of this in more detail for later on in the year. So that just leaves me. There are some people typing. I'm trying to give them a chance, but there's nothing coming through yet. No, it stopped.
Nice comments. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much, Jo, and have a great day.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.